Hi, everyone. Welcome to Poetry and Talk. Poetry and Talk is a new online interviewing platform for poets to share their poetry, background, and inspiration. Thank you so much for checking in with us today. We have a new guest poet to introduce you to. I'm Leslie Sue, the host for Poetry and Talk. Please make sure that you check out our Facebook page, Poetry and Talk, and stay connected with us. We have lots of poet interviews that we've uploaded, and we hope that you're drawing some inspiration from them. Poetry and Talk is all about being open and staying open to new ideas, to new ways of seeing, to new ways of perceiving, and to new inspiration so that we can be inspired and create in new and innovative ways as poets and in our lives. So again, thank you everyone for watching. I'm Leslie Sue, host for Poetry and Talk. Let's go ahead and meet our guest poet for today, James Cartee. How are you, James?
I'm doing well. Thank you so much for having me. Glad to be here.
Absolutely. Thank you for being with us. So would you like to go ahead and open the show for us and give us a brief little introduction of one of your poems and then read that to us?
Yeah, absolutely. I would love to. I don't know. Yeah, you can see it because sometimes with this background thing, you can kind of see it there. Anyway, this was from my latest small anthology, if you will, that was published in 2018. Since I started my PhD, I've been writing more academically and more personally with the poetry, but no, it says 2015. Oh my gosh, time flies by. But it's called 18 Blessed Detours. And as you can see with the photograph in the background, I've been very successful with mixed media, matching my poetry with pictures, like original photographs. And that's how Woodson and Knowles, the publisher out of Alabama, which is kind of like an independent group, picked up my 3 books that are out there. So the name of this poem is Dreamy Awakening in My Own Realized Surrealism. So it's a little deep. So be patient with me as I read these lines. So, no longer hopeless at the depths of my own drunken self pity, I motivated a dark shadowed angel, blessed to my own fit. Together, fascinated in corporate trip, we advanced the kingdom and the eternal causes that the breakthrough of traditional rituals no longer hold on in bondage and sinful chains. As I slumber into an almost deep REM sleep of unconsciousness, I drop the pots and pans and strings to be reminded of the memories not recalled, to investigate a moment long forgotten. The crime scene moves forward with elementary deductions. I fell into deep waters from cliffside dives to be tossed by waves of tortures with never ending thoughts until the world comes alive. Freedom reborn from the forgiveness that cleanses all, these dry bones dance passionately now in redemption. To face the past and grieve with great love and healing, the illustration of humility appreciates the present time when heaven falls down into glory and its formation to sustain myself like I could not push before. When I awoke from hibernation, my spirit no longer weighed my shoulders down in depression. Hope was sent from above, from the mystery of grace. Prayers of outpouring were finally answered beyond doubts. My God delivered from the rock bottom of my ditch, where I no longer wanted the gift of life since celebration of my birth and magical day of motherly creation. Beautiful love of family and friends surrounded me. I am with you. You will not be forgotten, were the words whispered from nearby oceans. Desert dunes no longer flooded my slumber in sinking sand. I broke through the mirage to overcome above all adversity. Psychological collapse from the death valleys in our journey constructed my surrealistic clocks of Dali paintings stuck. The Lord moved me to rise up, this desperate people, awakened to lead those who would follow the higher purpose. No longer hopeless at the depths of my own drunken self pity, I motivated a dark shadowed angel, blessed it to my own fit. Together, fascinated in courtship, we advanced the kingdom and the eternal causes that the breakthrough of traditional rituals no longer hold on in bondage and sinful chains. And that was called Dreamy Awakening in My Own Realized Surrealism. And it was written on March 6, 2015. And in the book, there's actually a picture of Half Dome from Yosemite National Park that kind of matches I guess some of the metaphors that are kind of nature-like, if you will. So.
Mm-hmm. Right. James, that was very beautiful and very deep. And I'm getting a picture of like a quest for truth, a quest for healing, and a quest for awakening. Is that something that you're kind of exploring? Can you share with us a little bit more about this poem that you've written?
Yes, of course. I think at that time, I'm now married and just had a baby about 3 months ago, and my wife is that dark angel mentioned in the poem in the first and last stanza. And meeting her kind of revitalized some inspiration, if you will. And I was kind of experiencing a long, like dark time, like kind of a valley-like experience. Like I had a great job and went to church regularly and had friends and lived in a beautiful city, but it's like things just didn't feel right. And I guess knowing myself, and so I guess as we mature and we grow up and we move on, we kind of focus on the things that are important. And what we felt like were valley like experiences in the past, in which they very well could be, we don't tend to go so up and down with just trivial matters anymore, especially when we find a significant other that's a great support partner and spouse or partner that just kind of joins you for the journey and helps bring you out of those times. And I guess I would describe life as a quest, or poetry, just the nature of writing poetry is an expression of art that I think has been lost by many, or not respected as much perhaps as the other literature genres. However, I would say the majority of poets have like a journal type mentality of when words come, they write it down or they type it in their computer, and eventually maybe some of those pieces get published, right?
Mhm, mhm. It also sounds like you were questioning a lot of things. A lot of times when we hit rock bottom, we really start to kind of question many things in life within ourselves, so many different aspects. Um, so can you get a little bit more into that with us? Like within your poem, it sounds like you're questioning a lot of traditional things, kind of wanting to break free, saying, okay, this is kind of what I was exposed to. These are kind of like a belief system or a system of thought processes that were kind of
Sure.
given to me. Yeah, if you could elaborate, please.
Sure. Well, I mean, like I'm an overthinker or even a delayed thinker, meaning I absorb and process through things um, for days, sometimes more philosophically than like, oh, I'm struggling with this through depression, even though that's something I think we've all experienced. Um, but I think that like I'm a Christian, and that is a heavy influence in my poetry. And like some of the biblical characters wrestled with God, I certainly have my own experiences with that. um but I also think that as time moves on, our priorities change. And holding my baby for 20 minutes at night is the best part of my day. Like it's not about how much money I'm making. It's not about how many degrees I'm getting or what scholarship funds are coming forward or what academic pieces am I now publishing or presenting. Um, you just kind of take attention off yourself and start. It's almost like as Thanksgiving comes, it's like a renewal of gratitude. Like if you this morning, and this may sound really simple to some, and this is actually from a book I just recently read, but the book was about mindfulness and like the psychology of doubt. And it basically said, take time each day to kind of just like pick up something that's natural, not necessarily like a television remote or something mechanical, and just appreciate that. And like I saw some Orioles outside my window that were like, dancing around in a puddle. And it was just like, oh my gosh, like the little, their little feet. I mean, it's just like, how does a little paperclip like that make birds bounce up and down? And then um there's a moth that I swear has not moved outside my door in 48 hours. And I mean, I've gotten pretty close to him to stare at his like colors because he's beautiful. And I think that like sometimes the globalization and Americanization of like effort and it's like we have this person in our head we want to be, or this thing we're trying to do, and I think eventually, again, as you mature, and not that accomplishments and achievements and goals are bad, but I fear for people that are defined by those things when that becomes their, I guess, sense of self in trying to measure their accomplishments through what they do, or a task list, if you will, because like the security of identity doesn't, these poetry books didn't sell millions. I'm not a New York Times bestseller. I might be a recognized professor one day, but it's like, those little simple moments are really going to be the things that I think you take in the long run. And if you'll agree with me on anything, life doesn't usually turn out the way you expect, but that doesn't necessarily mean that's bad. So,
Right, sure, sure, absolutely. Can you tell us again the name of the title of your poetry book, James?
this poetry book, and I'll be glad to like put a link on the poetry and talk page. I'm not to
Yes.
advertise myself, but just to let people know. But this one's called 18 Blessed Detours, and it's 18 poems, and then I have another anthology called 35 Virtuous Blueprints, and then another one called 23 Deeply Rooted Confessions. And so it's 35 poems, 35 photographs, 23 poems, 23 photographs. And all of these poems have been worked on, in the past 10 years, draft after draft after draft. And I guess that's one thing I would encourage people is to get some feedback on your poetry. Now, it can be a parent, it can be a professor at a school or a high school teacher, like, just to get other opinions. But like, even some of the poems that are in these books, I could read them again and find something that I want to change because they're, developments through my lifetime, I guess you could say. But this is called 18 Blessed Detours. And then the poem again was Dreamy Awakening in My Own Realized Surrealism. But they've each got a forward with a recognized scholar usually, and then three or four endorsements on the back as well. So.
I'd like to ask you, James, with those three books, you begin it with a number, and they're both two numbers. Is there any significance to the numbers? What is there any story behind that you'd like to share?
Um, 18 Blessed Detours was we had 18 poems and 18 photographs. Like, 23, I used to really, and still do really admire Michael Jordan, as silly as that sounds, but even sequentially, the number 23, two coming before three. And then 35, I think I was just about to celebrate my 35th birthday then. But again, keep in mind there's a publisher and editor, and they kind of weigh in on these things. Thankfully, I got a huge say in the titles, but they have to kind of sign off on that, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Share with us some other things about maybe going back a little bit to your poetic origins. How did you get started? What even inspired you? Did you have someone who was encouraging you? Did you have somebody who was influencing you? How did all this begin?
I think that because I've published a memoir that's no longer on the market anymore. That was traditionally published too, but the content was very personal. And as we know, sometimes we can use poetry to metaphorically like explain ourselves, but not reveal too much information if people in the outside world may use that information in ways that hurt us, if that makes any sense. But in the sixth grade, I had a crush on a girl. I won't say her name because we are Facebook friends, but I wrote I think it was called Angel in Heaven. And I made her like this little Valentine's Day card and this poem. And then that same year in my English class in sixth grade, we had to put together an anthology of like 25 poems. And like the poems could be ones that we had written, or they could be famous poets, but we had to write them out and then kind of put them in a binder. And, that 25 poems for a sixth grader, I mean, that's kind of overwhelming because it's like, now I hear 25 pages, and that's kind of a norm for a semester paper for what might be even an easy class in a doctoral program. But not that any classes in a doctoral program are easy, but so from there, I just kept journals, and I kept writing and writing. And, when I would travel, that would be usually moments of inspiration, holidays, or especially time with family. Um, and I think what's kind of interesting is I've had all of the mentorship and criticisms, and I'm in a writers group that meets once a month through an organization called Word Weavers. So like I've gotten a lot of opinions on, like, doing personification and alliteration and the traditional couplets, stanzas, quadruplets, whatever have you. And it's like I even at one point applied to a master's program in Middle Tennessee and got a late acceptance and then a scholarship to get into that MA English program. But what you don't know is that I was rejected from the 6 or 7 other programs. And, I think in that process, yes, I was a little discouraged, but I think I learned that, like, poetry, yes, iambic pentameter and these tools are there so we become better poets, but they shouldn't like define our poetry so much that they become the poetry. And my narratives or my free rhyme or free verse, like that was me. And like I would have one professor, like a person that was well published with an MFA in creative writing, that loved it, and then another one that had a PhD in English that hated them. So it's like, I think that's the beauty of poetry, or maybe even art, is you have interpretations and likes and dislikes. But um, I ended up following my academic route in communication as a social science instead of creative writing. Um, However, I guess what I learned there is that, criticism can be taken productively if you try your best not to take it personal. At the time, I took that personal because most of these people knew what they were talking about. I mean, they taught these things for years on end. But at the same time, it's like I didn't write these books. I didn't make money off of these. I did this because I enjoy it. And it's something that it was an outlet of creativity that I did for myself, not to impress somebody else because I could, make it look like Walt Whitman or one of the other greats in it and be their mentee, even though they're not alive or whatever the case may be. So, I guess if the greatest advice I can give anyone is like, don't let other people's opinions of your poetry determine what you think your poetry should be. Like, be individualistic and original. And if somebody tells you it's bad, the next week a country star may pick it up and write a song from it. So it's like, don't like try to be open to criticism, but don't let it like demoralize you. So,
Mhm. I like that, being true to your authentic voice.
yeah.
I'd like to ask you also, James, on the same subject line, so to speak, being true to your authentic voice, do you feel that you are at that place now? Do you feel like it kind of always has been there and it's evolved? And if so, how has it evolved? And how do you think that it may change in being open to new ideas and new ways? What is your feeling on this from kind of like where you've been to now, and kind of projecting and seeing some things perhaps into the future in respect to your authentic voice?
Well, it's interesting that you say that because that's a very like almost like a paradigm question, if you will. Meaning like, perspective, like what do you consider a person's voice to be almost. And ironically, in the last week or so, I just wrote what we call in academia is a research philosophy statement or a teaching philosophy statement. And I'll get to the point on how this relates to voice in just a minute. But the idea behind these philosophies statements is that they're continually adapting and they're changing as you become passionate about the research that you've you know you've pursued. So like if you happen to be like a natural author where you focus your poetry on nature and maybe how that relates to relationship, and that's like a a theme you pursue for like a year, your voice may change in the next year, where you focus more on personal emotion or personal experience if you're you know um, living in another country or whatever the case may be. And so I think your voice is continually adapting, like this research and these teaching philosophy statements. Like, um, even today, I had somebody look at that philosophy statement, and in the next 3 or 4 days, I'm going to change a few things because the direction has changed based on a mentor who I highly respect. Her criticism is a little more positive and productive than others in the past, as bad as that sounds. But one of the things I write in there is like the pursuit of lifelong learning. Like if I while I hopefully one day I'll be a professor and that PhD will be after my name and I'm publishing poetry and academic jargon plenty. Um, I can learn something from anybody that's working anywhere, whether that's a retail store, a grocery store, or McDonald's. Like I can learn something from everyone that's been through hardship. And that's every ethnicity, that's every culture, that's every background. That's not just like the targeted individuals. And so like I find that my voice is developing as I pursue that lifelong learning. And so at the end of this year with the baby, and a new job and working on my doctorate and my marriage becoming even closer and tighter than it's ever been, my voice looks very drastically from the beginning of 2020 to what it may look like in the middle to the end of 2021. And I hadn't written a lot about the COVID-19 epidemic, personally journaling. I mean, not to like post stuff and be controversial, but it's been a hard year for everyone in different ways. And this is like a really good time if that spurs emotions to write and come up with some new literature. And so the voice that you heard in this poem from 2016 is going to look a lot different than me in a year or so. So lots of joyful things to write about, but a lot of tragedy. Like my great uncle, my wife's uncle, and then her old boss who mentored and inspired her all died within like a week, and it wasn't even like COVID-19 reasons. I mean, it's just like things like that happen and they impact you. It's just whether you decide it's for good or bad, right?
Mm-hmm. Were those some of the things that you wrote about, or just that you were saying you just journaled about just for yourself to maybe kind
Well,
of hear?
yeah, like I've got a poem about an aunt that died several years ago, and one of my grandmother, and then my grandfather. It was kind of like a tribute. One of them I read at their funeral, but no, these were things that just happened within the last like 2 or 3 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
So it wasn't, poetry that I published, but it's just um, you know, media right now is focused on statistics with this virus and, life as we might define it based on these statistics. I don't think things are always that black and white or that simple, but it's like then in this short amount of time, for non COVID-19 reasons, we lost 3 people we treasured in a short amount of time. And so my voice looks different, probably from the things I've contemplated just 3 or 4 weeks ago to now. If anything, again, those moments where I'm looking at insects and birds and holding my daughter at the end of the day become even more significant because, like, tomorrow you may have this recording and you may never hear from me again because you realize that, you read my obituary and I'm gone. So it's like you kind of have to relish each moment, and hopefully your voice becomes stronger and more powerful as a result of that. So yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you for sharing that, James. I'd like to touch upon what you mentioned a little bit earlier, that you like to incorporate in your poetry some imagery. Could you touch upon that?
Yeah, sorry about that. So like I have done several through hikes. In the running community, I had trained for a 50K, which is like 32 miles, and I snuck in a marathon before that 50K And so some of my, my poetry is about the journey. And so that can be metaphorically very much related to running. Because when you get into those distances, it's easy just to say, my knees are killing me. I want to quit. This is awful. um, but it's like, so, it's like, take the personification of an experience, to me, can very much relate to whatever it might be that you're writing about. For example, I've done 3 or 4 mission trips to the Bahamas to serve in a little island community called Eleuthera, and their economy, or at least this island, thrives on the conch shell. They eat the conch snail raw. They make conch tarts, conch cookies, conch soup, conch anything you can think of. They have recipes for it. And so, like, all of a sudden, a seashell that you pick up in South Carolina on a beach, you don't even know it, but like, there are people that thrive on that shell and what's in it. And you can maybe even write not necessarily a poem about conch shells and the snails inside them, but using the shell as a metaphor for your life and the significance that it has in this trip that changed your life. And call it the conch shell, if you will, or the journey of my conch shell, or the journey of um, my siege voyage, or whatever the case may be. But you see a waterfall with 2 rainbows in the background right now. Like, I don't always say necessarily like heaven and hell, but a lot of times I might talk about like mountaintop experiences, or valleys, and you may have heard some of that in that poem I just read. Or I talk about, this is another good example. When I met my wife, she reminded me of the girl with the dragon tattoo, that movie in the books. If you've ever, and that girl, if you've met her and you're, let's just say, more traditional in things, she's kind of scary. Might beat you up, kind of scary. And so, my wife had, an unusual haircut and several earrings and some very spiritual type tattoos on her back that had some bats and snakes. And I mean, this was not the sorority girl that I dated from undergrad. I mean, this was a very different individual, but maybe again, teaching me to be open minded to get to know people individually. Because, like, if you saw her now in this video, you would not have recognized her compared to that person I met 6 or 7 years ago. So, like, she was the dark angel that I referred to. But you don't know the story unless I tell it to you like this, that she was that girl with the dragon tattoo for me, and then ended up coming into my life. And not that this defines you one way or the other, but got serious about a career, maybe changed her wardrobe a little bit, got a college degree. And while these may have been some things I encouraged, like, together we grew, and that took on its own meaning, growing together, the bond of marriage. And so all of these things can be written as symbols or signs or systems of signs that can then be turned into beautiful poetry. There's a theory that's popular in communication called semiotics, and essentially the idea is that signs of systems interpret into meanings. Well, I'm doing an analysis on the Goo Goo Dolls Black Balloon video. Well, a lot of people don't know, but that video actually is, depending on who you talk to, band members included, is about heroin. And Baby Black Balloon, when I was in high school, I thought that was about the band member liking a girl, like a crush. So, like, you see, one thing is like, oh man, he really likes this girl and I'm jamming. This is an amazing song in the 90s. And now it's like, that might have been about drugs, Baby's Black Balloon. And so it's like something, that song, as much as it impresses me and speaks to me, has a lot of symbols with black bubbles and black balloons and shadows. And so those systems of signs have made a beautiful short film and a beautiful song. And so that's kind of how poetry is, I think, in a lot of ways to me too. So.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. That's interesting. Thank you for sharing that. So getting in a little bit deeper really helps to open us up. And I love what you shared with you and your wife. And what a beautiful story of two people coming together and opening and evolving and growing together. So thank you so much for sharing that.
Sure.
I'd like to touch upon, James, um, some of your creative process. To me, it's such a fascinating and almost somewhat enigmatic subject, from nothing to something and everything in between. And every guest poet, pretty much, that comes on Poetry and Talk, I like to ask them that. So what is your creative process primarily when you're writing your poetry? Can you share some of that with us?
Um, yeah, I mean, like, I don't typically like, unless it's like nonfiction and maybe like life inspirational literature. Um, Even with the academic stuff, usually I can get words on paper. Um, but like my mind is like continuously like moving in terms of like academic literature and the frame of mind I'm in right now, because I've just got assignments and I'm teaching, and it's like everything's about theory and public relations and communication. But with poetry, like, I mean, I could write a poem about meeting you, and it would be significant to me. Or the enlightened trail on this bridge you have behind you, or the waterfall behind me. And I've got a lot of inspiration, if you will, from my daughter right now, Annabelle. And so um, things are always happening around me. And I mean, if I journal something, now it may not sound good, but hopefully that's not people's intention writing poetry, is for it to first sound good. I would just say, like, even if you think what you are writing sounds awful and it's really bad, like, write it anyway. And eventually, whether that's 2 weeks later, 2 months, 2 years, 20 years, and I'm not kidding about that, that that original thing that you're writing may be very beautiful and it may win an award. Poets and Writers, very popular magazine, nonprofit oriented. If you just want to get out there and get in some contests, some you have to pay for, some are free. Like, send in your poem and they'll give you some feedback. And if you have the time to do that, it's just a great way to like see what you got, so to speak. But it's a great magazine, great way to just kind of know what's going on. In the world of poetry around us, for people that still care about poetry. But I think that the best advice I can give you is just like, don't think writer's block. Just don't think so much and write whatever's on your mind. Like, it can be that your stomach hurt all day and you're relating, life to a bad night, like it's just like, write it. And it's like, something good will come of it, especially if you're writing hundreds of words over days at a time. You're going to have more context and more textual things to work with, as opposed to just sitting there and thinking you don't have anything to write about. But the truth is, you do. And you just have to put pen to paper. And sometimes it's just discipline about doing something, even when you don't feel like you can or can't. And a lot of times, like, I would say my best moments are when I'm passionate about poetry, but I'm probably most productive even when I'm not passionate, just because I'm disciplined to sit down and do it. So.
Mhm. James, we're going to need to wrap things up. Is there anything that you'd like to touch upon before we close? And also, can you let us know how we can stay connected with you, please?
Sure. Yeah, I would just like I've kind of reiterated now. Maybe more, most importantly, like, don't be careful about comparing your life to other people. But like, even within yourself, we tend to have this projection of what we think we should be, or where we think we should be, or who we think we should be. But it's like, there's something to be said about finding contentment in the person you are in the present, and not being like ashamed of that or self-judgmental. Sometimes it's not the words that people project onto us as it is as much the words we project on ourselves when we look ourselves in the mirror. And it's like, we're all human and we can only do so much. So like, Be around positive people. That goes a long way too. That like your poetry, that maybe be able to critical about it, but can also say something positive about it as well. You reached me at carteecommunications@gmail.com. So that's CARTEE, and then the subject with an S. So COMMUNICATIONS@gmail.com is a great way to touch base with me. If you're okay with it, I actually have a blog called daddydestinations.com right now. And there's actually a pretty decent following kind of coming up with that, writing about my daughter. So that's one way to reach me, is through that website too. But for your followers, if they just see my name with the post I put on the Poetry and Talk site, if they want to message me through Facebook, that's fine, just the same. So.
Okay, great. James, thank you so much for being
Sure.
this poet for today. We certainly appreciate it. Is there a way we can get in touch with your books as well?
Yes. I will put a link on there with that information as well.
Okay,
They're all on Amazon, but there's so many wonderful pieces on Amazon now with the ability to self-publish. That even if you change a prepositional phrase, you may not find the title you're looking for. So if okay with you, or if you want me to email you that instead, I'll get that to you so you can put it on the Facebook there too.
yeah, absolutely, James. We'll include all of that in the post. You sound like you have quite a lot going on, and we wish you a lot of success with all your endeavors, with all the things going on, and your
Thank you.
new baby and whatnot. So thank you again, James, for being with us today. It was a great interview. Thank you.
Yeah, sure. And please stay in touch. If you need more people to maybe do this with you that are poetic and personality, I'd just be interested to see where this little venture of yours goes. It's awesome. I love it.
Thank you. Thank you. We appreciate that. Absolutely, we'll be in touch. We want to
Okay.
thank everybody for watching today, Poetry and Talk. Again, you can stay connected with us on our Facebook page, Poetry and Talk. Please like and share. Check out our poet interviews, and please be on the lookout for new poet interviews as well. We'll talk soon on the next Poetry and Talk. Until then, be well and be blessed. Thank you again, James. Thank you, everybody, for watching. We'll talk soon. Thank you.